welcome to the Bootham School Hustings 2019. It's very good to see a very large crowd, several faces I recognise from school, and quite a number of people who we welcome this evening as guests. For those of you who wonder who the heck I am to welcome you to Bootham School, I should explain that I'm Chris Jeffrey. It's my great privilege to be the headmaster of this school, and also my great honour and slight trial to have to be the moderator and the chair of this evening's event. Last time I sat here doing this, life seemed very different. The one thing that was the same is the tie, which has got the colour of every single party represented here this evening on it, so I feel I'm being suitably neutral. And in some ways it's hard to believe that 2.5 years on from the last time we were here having a hustings, we're back again. And in some ways, it's not hard to see why 2.5 years after we were here before, we're back here again. Because the way things have gone in that last 2.5 years sort of indicates to me, to some extent, that we weren't necessarily going to resolve the situations that were part of our discussions then in the intervening time. I think a lot has changed since then in many respects, not least in the nature of the political discourse that has developed within our country, some might say degenerated within our country over the last 2.5 years. And it's my great hope that both on the platform and from the audience tonight, that we will not let that infect the nature of the discourse we have between us. The main thing that struck me last time I chaired this event was the respectfulness of the discussions that took place and the respect that the candidates showed for each other. And I'm sure that is something which we will see again this evening. Those of you who know us will need no reminding that Bootham is a Quaker school. Among the testimonies that the Quakers hold, the values the Quakers ascribe to, are the testimonies of honesty and of simplicity. And my hope is that both those things will inform the contributions of our candidates tonight. And I will be happy to remind candidates of that as the evening goes on if I need to. Another habit we have in our school is at the beginning of a meeting that we hold together, we take time to hold a short period of silence. We do that in order to gather ourselves, but most importantly, in order to open ourselves to listen. So I'm going to ask whether at the very beginning of this evening we can just hold a short period of silence to do that, to gather ourselves and to be open to listen, and we'll do the same at the end. Thank you very much indeed. Right, as you've been coming in this evening, you will have been given the opportunity to vote in a sort of entry poll. We'll do the same thing at the end, and so that we can actually have a look at whether the discussions that have taken place this evening have changed people's minds. We've done it rather differently this year. We were led to believe by an insider that last year there were some instructions given to one political grouping that they shouldn't vote in the poll at the beginning and only at the end, so that it appeared that their party might have done better. We've managed this evening, I think, to get round that possibility. So I hope you've all behaved yourselves, and you're all going to be good, and I don't have to put anybody in detention as a consequence of malpractice. So I'm going to ask, before we actually hear from the candidates, I'm going to ask Nell Judge, who is one of our College 2 or Upper 6 students, to come and share with us what the results are of the poll on the way in, and she'll come back later to do that. So welcome to Nell.
Good evening and welcome to Bootham School. I would just like to take a moment to explain the initial poll results that have happened as you've been coming in tonight. So to start off, we will discuss the voting intention. So as you can see by the graph, the Labour Party have actually got the majority of the votes with 32.9%, followed by the Liberal Democrats with 24.4%, then by the Conservative Party with 18.3%, with the SDP coming in next with 3.7%, and then other is actually quite a significant part, as people, 6.3% of the votes have been for people that aren't represented here tonight. And the Brexit Party has also received 1.3% of the vote. However, the Yorkshire Party and the independent candidate have actually received no votes. So it'll be interesting to see how this changes after and throughout the hustings. So to move on, so we've also divided the voting up into York Inner and York Outer, so the different constituencies within York. So as you can see, Labour with Rachel Maskell is leading by with a majority of 52%. However, as you can see, there is also some Liberal Democrat, Green voters, and Yorkshire Party voters that would vote for Labour in this general election as a tactical vote. You can also see this with the Liberal Democrat vote. The majority of people who have the intention of voting Liberal Democrat have voted Liberal Democrat, but as you can also see, some people that wanted a different party have also voted Liberal Democrats. Next is the Green Party, and the Green Party has 14% and has no tactical voting, so it's just people that wanted to vote for Green. And also the SDP has got 4% of the vote, and the Conservatives have also got 6% of the votes, and the Yorkshire Party has also got 2% of the vote. However, the Brexit Party has still failed to get any of the votes in York Central. So to move on to York Outer, this is quite interesting to compare to York Central, because obviously in this constituency, the Conservative MP, Julian Sturdy, has actually got the majority of votes, and some of the people that would have voted for other parties have too voted for Julian Sturdy. As the Green Party aren't standing in York Outer, all of their votes in York Outer have gone to the Labour Party, and the Liberal Democrat has also got some tactical voting with the other people that wanted to vote different parties. And the independent MP, Scott Marmion, has also got votes from the Liberal Democrats. So those are the initial polls, so it will be interesting to see if these change throughout, and if which way it swings, and if the hustings has any influence on people's votes. Thank you.
I think the hustings is so dynamic. The figures have changed between Nell being given them and her arriving at the front of the stage. We'll see if we can sort that one out later. Well, first of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about the basis on which we have invited people tonight. We asked all parties standing in either York Central or York Outer to send one candidate. And as it turns out, we have all 7 candidates from York Central here this evening. We also had one candidate from York Outer who has submitted, as he was entitled to, a statement which I'll read out shortly. So the candidates for York Outer at this election are, for the Liberal Democrats, Keith Aspen, Scott Marmion as an independent, Anna Perrott for Labour, and Julian Sturdy, who is the sitting MP for the Conservatives. And to introduce the candidates this evening, from right to left, or my right, your left, to my left, your right. Yep, that's about right. First of all, could you welcome, on behalf of Liberal Democrats, James Blanchard. Representing the Social Democratic Party, we have Andrew Dunn. For the Green Party, Tom Franklin. For the Labour Cooperative Party, the sitting MP, Rachel Maskell. For the Yorkshire Party, the only man I ever shared a house with on the panel tonight, 32 years ago, Andrew Snedden. For the Brexit Party, Nicholas Skeeler. And for the Conservative Party, Fabia Tate. So in a minute we will start off our proceedings by asking each of the candidates, in the order that they came out of the tin, rather than the hat, to present a 3-minute summary. But before that, I've been asked if I'd read the statement from Scott Marmion, who wasn't able to attend, but was actually permitted to send a statement. This is what it says. So Scott is sorry, is it Sam? Scott. It says Sam on here and Scott on here, but there we are. His surname is Marmion, that is for sure. Whether you pronounce it, no, that's another matter altogether. Thank you. So he says, "Dear fellow citizens of York, I'm proud to have put myself forward as a candidate to be your MP, which provides you with a fresh choice besides those of the main parties. Elections are all about choice, and every one of you should feel free to vote how you want to and not be pressured into voting tactically at the behest of the political establishment. I've been disgusted at the way politics has been conducted both locally and nationally over the last 2 years, and so I've entered this race as an act of rebellion against it. I'm sure many of you will feel likewise, and soon you will have the chance to join me in expressing your frustrations over the way we've all been treated. I will not waste time offering fictitious sums of money to you. Instead, I will be campaigning with my ideas for running the city and country properly. Many of you will have voted Remain. I respect that. But if democracy is to mean anything, then the overall Leave verdict must be honoured. To do otherwise would be an assault against democracy itself, and that is something I would never do. So I ask all Democrats, both Leave and Remain, to support me in ensuring that Brexit happens on the best possible terms to end this national division. This process has also led to the Constitution being deliberately broken by politicians and the wider establishment. This is both a tragedy and an opportunity. We've been electing our parliament under the same representative system since the 13th century, and now it must evolve. Party politicians do not represent you in parliament. They represent their party leaders' views during a whipped Commons division. If elected, I will start a campaign for a directly elected Prime Minister, so that, just like in the referendum, every vote counts equally, no matter where you are in the country, and stop the nation's leader being decided by an eternal stitch-up within the main parties. With a separately elected government, you are then free to hire your MP on personal merit rather than by association. Surely this is a freedom any proper democracy should adopt. Locally, I will work to see the major roads both dualled, properly grade separated, and get rid of the choke points that are the roundabouts. Nothing short of a fully engineered solution to make the project future-proof is acceptable to me. I want to see the constituency boundaries redrawn by the River Ouse into York East and York West, so MPs don't sit in safe seats anymore, but in tough marginals. Make them work for your vote. I also want to see the council wards broken up into single seats to level the playing field and ensure every individual standing has to earn victory themselves. Finally, I want the ultimate decision on major housing developments to become democratic by giving it to an elected representative of the locals, not an unknown civil servant deciding purely on technical grounds. As an independent, I will have one master and one master only, the electorate. No party whip or wealthy backer will instruct me what to think. I will use my own mind to decide how best to enact what the citizens of York want, free from bias or interference. My campaign will be conducted as I will serve in office. Instead of me visiting your doorstep to provide you with junk mail and ask something from you, i.e. your vote, I will keep my door open to you when you need something from me. You can find out about my policies by following the links on my Twitter account, @MarmionScott. There we are, there's the answer. Thank you. So we're now going to move on to the second part of our evening, which is speeches from the candidates. We did a draw, as I said earlier on, and we're going to ask each candidate to speak for 3 minutes. You will be able to see a party politically coloured countdown on the screen. They will be able to see the rather forbidding clock up there. So if they could all finish on or before or microscopically after 3 minutes, that would be great. And our first candidate to speak this evening is Fabia Tate for the Conservative Party. From the lectern, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Is that good? Everyone here? Just going to apologise at the beginning for my voice. I've been out campaigning So it's a little bit of a struggle, and I don't think I'm going to quite make it to the 3 minutes, but hopefully I'll be able to answer all your questions tonight. So this election is really about one thing. We've had politics for the last 3.5 years absolutely dominated by Brexit, and everyone is getting bored of it. There's been a complete stagnation of politics, and we need to get back to focusing on people and policies which affect everyone. So only a Conservative majority is going to be able to deliver Brexit, get the deal through, and then move on to issues that affect us all. And when you look at our manifesto, I think it's really a manifesto of hope and aspiration that benefits hard-working people. And that looks at more investments in the NHS, and especially in our mental health, which we need. We're already starting to look at it in the same way as physical health, but we need to have the support there so that everyone can access it when they need it. It's about investing in safer streets with more policemen, which will make a real impact here in York, where antisocial behaviour is on the rise. It's about investing in our education and levelling up the funds, so it doesn't matter where you live in the country, you can access good schooling, and that'll help to produce a better life later on. It's about building more houses and more affordable homes, and looking at more innovative ways that people can buy a home. And if you don't choose to buy, it's about protecting the tenant's right over landlords for the longer-term renters. This is about investing in businesses, and especially our small businesses, and cutting taxes and business rates so that they can thrive. And they make up so much of the local economy here in York that it's, I think, really impressive that we're pushing this policy and helping to boost our local high streets and keep these independent small businesses. But above all, and the issue that I think matters most to me, is climate change. Now, I think as the Conservatives, we have an impressive record in the last 9 years, and that's partly because the appetite in the UK is there for real climate change and for us to lead the way. We've already reduced CO2 emissions by 25%, which is 50% more than the other major economies. We've invested massively in our renewable energies, and now over a third of our electricity is generated renewably. But we need to do more, and that's why I'm delighted that our policies are pushing a Blue Planet Fund to clean up our oceans of plastic and protect the marine life, and also an environmental bill that's going to raise air quality levels, water and waste to some of the highest levels it's ever been. So if you are bored, as I am, as I think most of us are here, of how Brexit has stagnated our politics in the last couple of years, and wants to move on, then vote Conservative this election. Thank you.
Second candidate to speak this evening is Andrew Dunn from the Social Democratic Party.
Right, thanks very much. I admit I'm a bit nervy today because I just found out that AJP Taylor is one of the alumni of this establishment, and he was absolutely the best in terms of the historian, absolutely the best at addressing an audience unscripted, so I won't reach those kind of standards, but I'll do my best. But anyway, I think the SDP needs, I think you know a lot about the Conservatives and the Labour. We're probably one of the least well-known parties tonight. We aren't a new party. We were, as some of you all know, were around in the 1980s. Vince Cable, who went on to be the Lib Dems leader, stood here in York in 83 and 87. We haven't had a candidate since then, but we're fielding more candidates than we have for over 20 years now. And we think of ourselves as resurgent because in 2018, the leadership team produced this document, which is available on our website at sdp.org.uk. And it's our new declaration, which sums up our ideas. We've also got a new policy document, which forms the basis of what we're proposing in this election. And we feel we're filling an important gap in British politics at the moment, the gap, really, because we are kind of socially conservative with a small c, but economically, we are kind of centre-left, really. And to sort of illustrate that, I mean, I could sort of compare us to the main parties and our ideological position and the sort of things we believe in. And for example, the Conservatives, we respect their commitment to businesses, either big or small, but we have a very different approach to tackling social problems such as homelessness and low wages. We feel that they're complacent about those kind of issues, and education and health funding would be greater if the SDP had their way. Likewise, Labour, we think that they're fine, their commitment to the NHS is genuine, and I'm sure it would be fully funded, but we feel it's the most unpatriotic Labour front bench, or the front bench of any major party in British history. We feel that the Labour Party is overspending if you look at its proposals, and it's something that the Institute of Fiscal Studies would agree with us on. While we believe in some of the things that each of the parties have, we fiercely oppose others, and we know from research that our policies and our ideas are actually popular, even though hardly anyone's heard of us. So at this stage, we don't get many votes, but we're trying to, by standing so many candidates, we're trying to increase our popularity and the number of people who know about us. This declaration has led to me joining and many others, and we've increased our membership tenfold. So if you want to have a look, check us out on the website. We're not everybody's cup of tea, but you might be interested in that. As for the Lib Dems, I suppose they're the ones I haven't mentioned. And we believe, for example, that they're kind of committed to education, not in everything they've done, but the real difference between us and the Lib Dems, even though you might say we're on the centre ground, apart from the things I've already said, is that we are 100% pro-Brexit because we believe in democracy. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I like the standard honesty there. We're not everyone's cup of tea. I thought that was great. The most honest statement we've had. Thank you so much. Next for the Liberal Democrats, James Blanchard.
Good evening. Thank you. And thank you to the Bootham School for organising this event this evening as well. Liberalism is about personal freedom, and I want to explain something about that. Because people often ask what that means. It's freedom from whom? It's freedom from an overbearing state. It's freedom from big businesses. It's freedom from social norms. It's freedom for whom? And it's every single person. And it's very difficult to find people who actually want to stand up for every single person and give everyone real equality under the law. It's freedom for what? It's freedom to live your life the way you want to. Because at the end of the day, only you can be the expert in you. And I want to see a government that gives people the freedom and the tools to go about their lives to the best and, well, to find their happiness. And that's why I oppose Brexit, because Brexit is going to limit our freedom, particularly the youngest people, those who are at the school today. It brings into question who we are, and I think particularly here in York, which by a very healthy margin voted to remain, that seems to have been forgotten and to have been ignored. Brexit has been all our government has dealt with over the last couple of years, while our social services have been left to rot. In the month before the referendum, 1,300 nurses from the EU applied to applied to work in our NHS. Within a year, that had dropped to 46 a month. And that is why we have got 1 in 10 nursing posts in the NHS vacant today, not able to deliver the services that we need. We've got a housing crisis where our young people can no longer aspire to actually own a home, and we need to get builders in to do that work. We've got an education crisis. I'm a parent of 3 small children at a school in York. I've seen, since the Liberals left the coalition, cuts of £300 per pupil per year in the school my children are at. That means less teaching assistants, less enrichment, it means less good results. Most importantly, we have been able to do nothing on our environment. When the Lib Dems left the coalition, we were on target to have carbon-neutral electricity generation by 2020. Now, we're hoping to get it done by 2030. We need to take the environment seriously, and it's the Liberals who have pushed the government to do this in the past and will do so again. Brexit is not going to solve everything. In fact, if you vote for Brexit on Thursday, it won't be the end. It will be the beginning of a decade or 2 of stagnation whilst we try to unpick our relationships with our closest allies and friends, and we get nowhere when we should be addressing the real issues that are affecting real people here in York today. Thank you.
Now speaking for the Yorkshire Party, Andrew Snedden.
G'day. I'm a teacher, academic and musician living here in York. You might just be guessing I'm also an Aussie. And you might now be wondering, why is an Aussie standing for Yorkshire Party? It's a good question. Returning to the UK after some years, I was struck by the dysfunction of our tired old parliamentary system, all serious eggs in the Westminster basket. And when someone drops that basket, well, now we know. Then I found there was a serious party with serious plans to do something about it, so I joined. Who would have believed the incompetence of Westminster over the last 3 years? The lack of adult discussion, the petty party point scoring, the lack of reasonable compromise. Meantime, the country drifts, rudderless, and the world looks on in amazement and, worse, amusement. So now from the usual parties, we have the usual promises of heaven on earth by the middle of next week. Nice houses for all, great health for all, wealth for all, no climate change, and a free hamster. But this Westminster-centric government has failed us for decades, Tory and Labour, and will continue to do so. We are not a single-issue party, but I am here to talk about something you won't hear from the others, a way forward for our region and our country. Decentralising government, beginning with the Yorkshire Assembly, is the key to unblocking both Westminster gridlock and funding unfairness in the north. Yorkshire has the population of Scotland and twice the economy of Wales, yet the powers of neither. Like an Australian state, a Canadian province, or a German state, we need a regional assembly to give Yorkshire a fair division of the country's wealth and Yorkshire people a renewed sense of democratic engagement. Consider education funding. In York, primary pupils receive just over £4,000 per year on average, but in London and the South East, almost £7,000. In 2016, 32% of schools in Yorkshire and Humberside were rated require improvement or inadequate. In Greater London, just 9%. Is there perhaps a link between unfair funding and poor performance? If the Yorkshire Assembly seems impossible, just look at the rise of the SNP in Scotland. However, we do not seek independence, rather a stronger Yorkshire in a fairer, more modern UK. Over 50,000 people voted for us in the last European elections, and we have a growing number of local councillors. In this election, consider voting for a real future. Thank you.
Our fifth candidate this evening is Nicholas Skeeler, representing the Brexit Party.
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to be a little bit unconventional tonight. I'm going to declare from the outset my stance as a man who follows the Christian faith. There's a scripture from the book of Jeremiah 6:16, which says, "Stand at the crossroads and look at the old paths where the good way is, and then you will find rest for your souls. But you said, we will not walk in it." The political mess that we're in is a symptom of a sickness in our society. The arguments that we're hearing for and against Brexit are the same arguments we heard, or at least I heard, in 1975. We are in a situation now where this issue of leave or remain has transcended party politics, the old tribal system, and indeed it has so separated our nation, so divided us, that now it's no longer even about leave or remain. This is about who governs us. Now, there are lots of things that I could be doing other than standing here as a political candidate, something I'd never expected to do 6 months ago. I'm the kind of guy who can fly an aeroplane, skipper a boat, run your business, probably counsel an alcoholic neighbour, an all-rounder, and I thought I'd do whatever I could in this debate to bring some reality and to bring some solutions to the healing of this nation. What I'm about is the restoration of a system of democratic government. In my lifetime, the idea that 58% of the people of Yorkshire and Humber could vote for something and then 3.5 years it not be delivered is astonishing to me, and it should be to you. If Rachel Maskell becomes our MP, as she very well may do on Thursday, I will not be standing here and saying, actually, it was the wrong decision and it should be revoked. We have this principle of loser consent, which means we accept the outcome of a referendum. And I'm afraid that we've heard so much of lies and misinformation, fear, fear, fear. It makes us believe that we are not capable of determining the future of this wonderful island nation of ours ourselves. My father was a Holocaust survivor. The chief architect of Hitler's propaganda machine said, "Tell a lie long enough and people will believe it. Keep repeating it and they will accept it as truth." Those of you young ones who've ever watched The Matrix and saw what happened when Neo swallowed the red pill, he got to see the truth, and I've dug hard to find the truth. And sadly, whatever the polls are saying, the position I have is probably the position of the quiet majority in Britain.
Our penultimate speaker before we enter the question phase is going to be Tom Franklin, representing the Green Party.
Good evening. I'm Tom Franklin from the Green Party. I've actually just come here from an XR protest earlier this evening because the climate emergency is the defining thing of this election. We have heard and will hear about lots of other things, but the climate emergency is urgent and vital, and we have to address it. If we don't decarbonise, if we don't get to neutrality by 2030, then there is a serious risk that we will go over tipping points and York will become York underwater from floods down the Ouse, or York on the sea as sea levels rise. We have no choice but to address it. Some people say it's too expensive. The cost of not doing it is at least an order of magnitude higher. We absolutely have to, and only the Green Party has the policies to deal with that. It includes dealing with housing. We have to improve all our housing, because we have some of the worst insulated housing in this sort of latitude, and we spend more on heating than they do in Sweden. We have to change that, and we will. We have to decarbonise transport. That means putting a lot of money into public transport, actually cancelling HS2 and improving transport, local transport, improving bus services, electrifying Transpennine and local routes across the north, across Yorkshire. We have to spend sensibly where people want to do it. We have to make it so that the natural choice is to use public transport, walking or cycling. We've seen public transport rise in London because they invest in it there, because they have the money to spend. And of course that will create lots of jobs, so there will be lots of good jobs as a result. I'm going to raise something that's not been raised at any of the hustings so far because of the slogan on the back there, and that's our defence policy, which isn't, we don't call it defence, we actually call it peace and security. We want to have a Ministry of Peace. We want to turn around the way we address international relations and peace. We want to promote peace, de-escalate violence, and we would absolutely get rid of nuclear weapons because mass murder has no place anywhere. Tens of millions are dying. Education, we need to invest a lot more in education, but we also need to change its nature. At the moment, it's far too exam-focused. From SATs through GCSEs, through A-levels, through university, it's exams all the time, and that puts huge mental health issues on pupils. Mental health is a serious issue. We've actually had it raised at most hustings, and we have to organise education so it is about learning to love, learning, wanting to learn for the whole of life. I'd probably say that we also need to change the electoral system. We need to democratise our country. At the moment, Rachel Maskell will win on Thursday. I have no doubt about that. But therefore, most votes won't count. But Green votes will count, because if we can get 3 million votes, that will send a strong message. So you need to vote Green to send that message. Thank you.
And our final set of introductory remarks from Rachel Maskell for the Labour Cooperative Party.
Good evening. Can I start by thanking Bootham School for hosting this evening's election hustings, but also for the work it does across our city. And I know from working with the school how brilliant that is. This election is so important. It is a defining election about the kind of country you want to live in, the connections it makes across the world, but also tackling the real injustices we see before us. On the issue of Europe, our country has been at tug of war over this issue for the last 3.5 years, and yet we seem to have made no progress. That is why Labour has said very clearly, within 6 months, we will ensure that you have a final say on Brexit. We need to end this issue, but we do believe that we have all learnt so much more, I include myself in that we need to be able to put that choice of a final deal versus remain back to you to end the debate. But also we need to think about the consequences of what would happen if we left. Trading across the world will increase our carbon footprint, and also we know the threats coming from America over our NHS. We have some really precious things we are fighting for at this election. After a decade of austerity led by the Lib Dems and Tory government, we know that our community is hurting. Today, I was meeting a constituent who literally cannot afford heating and food. This is not the kind of country that Labour wants to build, and therefore we make no apologies for being ambitious in recreating a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, where we can all play our part, and where we invest in our future, making sure we've got the jobs that pay well, making sure we build the houses that people can afford to live in, and ensuring that we have got an NHS which cares for you in your future. And particularly as you get older and need more support, we will provide free social care as we build a national care service to support our whole population. But we also do have global challenges as well, and the climate crisis is at the heart of that. And as a shadow transport minister, I have ensured that we have seen a real turnaround in the way that we address transport, putting active travel, cycling and walking at standards as we see in The Hague and Copenhagen and in Amsterdam, making sure that people can cycle and walk. Also ensuring that our public transport system is working for everyone, investing in its future, clean and green and accessible. And of course, when it comes to rebuilding our country, as we must at this time, I want to ensure that all of you have a real say in your future, in our future, and therefore to build a new consensus as we move forward. Thank you.
Well, we have a number of questions that have been submitted as part of the ticketing process for this evening, and we're going to try and get through as many as we possibly can. I'm going to ask the candidates if they would answer as succinctly as they possibly can to give as many a chance to answer as many questions as possible. I'll probably pick one or two to start off the answer, depending on the question, and if others would like to contribute and feel they've got something really important to say on this, please indicate and I'll try and call you if we can. Our first question comes from a member of our lower six, our College 1 here at Bootham School, Dylan Bloom, and Luke has got the exciting, catchy microphone thing. Where's Dylan?
Considering the Leave campaign was found guilty of misinformation in late 2018, and that has been evident in the past years that Brexit will likely damage the UK economy, isn't a second referendum really the most democratic thing to do so that people can decide their future?
Thank you, Dylan. Fabia, can you start us off with this one?
Yeah. Thanks for that question, Dylan. Look, is that me or that mic? I don't see, I think we all had a vote, and we cannot keep rerunning elections every time if people don't agree with the result. And I don't see where that ends. If we have a second referendum, I would say obviously, as a Conservative, say we should need to get Brexit done, but I would not agree with a second referendum. I don't think that's democracy.
So you don't feel the question was about misinformation in the previous campaign and the concerns around likely damage to the economy. Is that something you would refute as well?
In terms of the Leave, I think there was misinformation on both sides of the campaign, but for me, I knew what I was voting for, and I would say to anyone that does cast their vote, put in the time to read up. Everyone has access to Google, so go and look and read the facts for yourselves, because every party will give you a rose-tinted view of what they're representing, so just do the research yourself.
Thank you. Tom?
There was serious fraud by the Leave campaign, overexpending, lies told, such that a judge did say that if it had been a binding referendum, they would have declared it void. So on that ground alone, it should be considered illegitimate and void. But also, we didn't know what sort of Brexit we were voting for. Some people would have wanted a wall down the English Channel, others just in favour of out. Now that we have a deal, just as with any trade union negotiation, when the trade union negotiators had a ballot to say, can I go and negotiate? And they come back and say, this is the deal, do you want it? We should come back and say, this is the deal, do you want it? And we should ensure that the referendum is clean and fair and binding.
Thank you. Nicholas Skeeler.
We've got a repeat of the same old arguments that, as a 65-year-old, I remember in 1975. I don't think many people wanted us to be in this situation, and certainly I think that it was a great surprise to our government that the decision to leave was made. What was really wanted was reform, because the European Union is anything but democratic. And I believe that had David Cameron been given any leeway in the reform that he wanted, then we would have never been in this situation. The question that we were given was simple enough. Do you want to leave the European Union or remain? And the decision that the people made was to leave. Now, that does not mean that we didn't all want cooperation and friendship and a re-engagement with Europe. I would be one to say we would, but not on the basis that we are ruled by people we cannot elect and cannot remove.
Thank you. James Bradshaw.
The senior Conservative minister, David Davis, said during the referendum campaign, when referring to the 70s referendum, that if a democracy cannot change its mind, well, you can't call it a democracy anymore, can you? So that's what this is about. And I think we have to utterly reject the idea that having a bit more democracy in any way can ever be seen as being anti-democratic. We should look at those countries which have referendums regularly. If you look at countries like Switzerland, which make practically every decision by referendum, they have rules and regulations which we don't have. And when they have a referendum that breaks the rules, or they have a question which doesn't really tell you what one side is, then they throw it out. And that's what we perhaps need to learn. Because if you look at the campaign for the referendum, we had obviously the infamous lies on the side of the bus. We also had the infamous poster saying that millions of Turkish workers were about to join the EU and come and swamp us using the most vile racist language. We were told that we would have the easiest trade deal because we would be holding all of the cards. Well, where is this easy, wonderful trade deal? It's just not happened. And Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is not someone I think I agree on anything else with, said at the time, we should have two referendums. One to set a kind of general course, and then when we've got a deal agreed, then we can put that up to the people as well. That's what we've got now. Theresa May and Boris Johnson have got a deal. Let's put it up against the deal we've got. Let's compare apples to apples and go from there. Because what this is about is democracy. Sorry, just one last point. This general election has been called because the Prime Minister thinks you've all changed your mind since 2017. But you can't possibly be allowed to have changed your mind since 2016. It's sheer madness.
Rachel Maskell.
I want to start by asking the question question why the Prime Minister is so reluctant to publish the dossier on the information, or misinformation, shall I say, from Russia. Because clearly we all want to know what is contained within that documentation. And therefore, why has he got anything to hide? Because we want to understand very clearly what was the information put out in 2016 and who was controlling that. Today, across our media, we never know if we're hearing truth or mistruth, and therefore this whole tug of war that we have at the moment over what is right and what is wrong and what we're hearing, is that correct or not, is making us all really stressed as we wrestle with that. And therefore it's absolutely right that we ask ourselves, in 2016, was that information pure that we saw? And of course, many, many questions have arisen from that. Now, I look at the evidence. That's the way I approach my work and have done as an MP. I've read all of the deals that have been proposed to Parliament, and I have to say they're very different, and I have a lot of concern. For instance, a no-deal scenario would make York the worst economically off place in the country. Am I going to stand up and vote for people in this city who are already struggling to be poorer? Well, quite frankly, that isn't why I came into politics. But also, we know that Theresa May's deal that came through put borders across the Irish Sea. Now, quite frankly, that's very dangerous. But then you look at Boris Johnson's deal, which cuts across the Good Friday Agreement. We've had 21 years of peace in Northern Ireland, or relative peace, and things are already sparking there. And therefore, I would not risk the Good Friday Agreement in order to push through a deal. And that's why it's really important that we put forward remain on a ballot paper. But what we have said is, because those deals are not acceptable, we will put a softer deal as an alternative on that. Because if you're voting for Remain, you've got to vote for something else on a ballot paper. I will campaign for Remain in the same way that I didn't trigger Article 50, and I've campaigned consistently that our future is best in Europe.
Speaking with typical Australian subtlety, the whole thing's a mess. I voted Remain, but we must go. Why? 3 quick reasons. 1, Brexit isn't entirely about Brexit. It's really as much about social unfairness and the third of our voting population who've been left behind for decades. They're raising their voices. They voted to leave. 2, Brexit is now about democracy. Cameron was an idiot, frankly, to promise that this simplistic referendum would be adhered to. But as the Prime Minister of this country, he did promise that. And then the Tories and Labor, in their subsequent election manifestos, also agreed the referendum would be adhered to. This would be a disaster now for democracy if all of that was simply overturned, whether by another referendum or by any other means. 3, it's now also about international credibility for the country. After 3 years of dithering, we would be shown to be utterly confused and weak, and it might take decades for Britain's reputation around the world to recover.
Thank you.
The good news is no one knows the future. We can always leave and go back.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I'll start by agreeing with that last point of Andrew's, because I don't mind if 3 seconds after the 2016 referendum result was announced that people said, right, we're going to start a campaign to get back in. But they should accept the result of referenda. We've had referenda on the Scottish Parliament, Welsh Assembly, whether we should have police and crime commissioners, whether we should change the voting system, and people just accepted the result. This is absolutely outrageous that people aren't accepting a democratic outcome. We had to wait a long time since Ted Heath took us into the EU, but it was only the EEC at that time. It was only a free trade area. We had a vote on it, but in the 70s, but it was just really for a free trade area, which was difficult to oppose, really. And then they took more and more powers from Westminster over to the EU, and we never got a chance to vote on it. We waited and we waited, and we eventually got a vote. And the only reason it was only 52-48 instead of something like 70-30 is because people were worried about the economic effects. People in this country have never had a majority for seeing themselves as European citizens. They've always thought of themselves as British or English citizens. There was a poll in the year before the referendum. There was an attitude survey that found that 2% of people saw themselves as European, whereas 60% in total saw themselves as either English or British.
Andrew, can I ask you to wind up?
Yeah, that's fine. That's all I want to say.
Thank you very much indeed. We've chosen this as the first question this evening because obviously it is one that is at the very heart of the reason why this election was called. So it seems appropriate to open this particular question up to one or two comments from the floor. So if anyone would like, I wonder whether we could ask Dylan to start with, whether he would like to respond to what he's heard. You can say no if you like. If you want the microphone.
Am I like basically giving my opinion or?
I just wonder whether you think you've had your question answered.
Yes, by some candidates with which I agree, but some I don't. So I guess that's democracy. And
I guess it is. Thank you very much. Anyway, there's a hand up at the front down here. The joy of this microphone is that Luke doesn't have to carry it from one place to another. You can simply throw it to the next person and they won't get hurt.
Thank you. I'm 17. I campaign to remain, but I've read more and more about the European Union. I've changed my mind and understand that referendums happen. But I think that, first of all, the attitude that all young people support Remain is quite a blanket statement. I think it's unfair. I think there is 30% of our population were young, voted to leave, and it's like saying all elderly people voted to leave. You can't just say these things. I think you all need to accept about the words you say. And secondly, the Green Party, you said earlier that this second referendum must be adhered to. Well, I asked, why are you adhering to the first referendum?
Let's leave it as a rhetorical question for now, shall we? Thank you. Anyone else like to make?
Okay, so you guys have been talking about truth quite a bit, and there have been a couple of inconsistencies with what I know to be true and what has been said. For example, the Welsh referendum about devolution, there are actually two of them. And in the first one, it was very strongly actually that they didn't want devolution, but then suddenly they changed their mind in the second one, which I think is fair, because when you learn more facts about things, you should be able to change your mind. In the same way that we're having another election after having one in 2015, 2017, now we're having one in 2019. So having another Brexit referendum isn't really too out of the world of possibility, I don't think, if we're going to keep having elections. Because, you said, Fabia, that if we've had a referendum, we should adhere to it and stick to it. We don't keep having votes. But we are keep having votes, right? We're keeping on having votes. And actually, it was your leader who decided that we should have another vote. So, I think it's important that if we are going to tell the truth, that we need to actually say the truth now, because the truth is that the first referendum was not democratic. They were guilty of lying, right? The Leave campaign was guilty of lying. So that's not really democracy. And, the fact that we're having another election now makes me think that we should be able to have another referendum later.
Thank you, Jake. It's great already that we're hearing the youth voice, as it were, which is a really good thing. Is anyone else? Is there one more comment anyone would like to make? One more at the front here.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to point out that on the topic of truth, is it not equally as important to be truthful as it is to adhere to the truth that we don't always agree with? The point I raised by saying that is that, we have certain candidates that are in favour of leaving, that would suggest that, it would be totally undemocratic to not respect the leave vote. On the other hand, we have candidates who are obviously in favour of Remain, who say that, it was the Leave campaign that told lots of lies, and completely ignore lots of the things. It was dubbed Project Fear at the time, people saying, planes are going to fall out the sky, which was proven fairly comprehensively on June the 24th that was not true. So all I'd say is, I think, rather than just saying, let's stick to truth, can we not just stick to the truth that we don't necessarily always agree with?
Thank you very much. I'm just going to give Tom a chance. He said in 2 sentences to respond to what I called rhetorical challenge from the gentleman at the front. But, let's take it as a real question, shall we?
The first referendum was advisory. It wasn't binding, so there was no obligation to follow it. We do need to settle this, and that is why the second referendum needs to be, in law, a binding referendum from the start. Secondly, second sentence, the first time we didn't know what we were comparing with what. This time we'll know what the deal is and what Remain is. So we will have a fair choice, as James said earlier.
Thank you. There's a fine use of semicolons in that long sentence. I really appreciate that. Very well done. Our next question is from Jack Leonard Morgan. Throw it over. Go on, Jack. That's the one. Perfect. That livens it up.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank all the candidates for coming this evening. I think it's very important to a healthy democracy that events like this happen. My question to you is, what will you and your government do to bridge the ever-growing economic inequality that is felt across the entire country in the current climate of economic uncertainty we find ourselves in today?
Thank you. Rachel, can you answer that one for us first?
Yes, thank you. Jack, your question goes to the heart of Labour's manifesto, because what we have made absolutely clear is that Labour's agenda is about addressing the huge inequality we are seeing now in our country. Here in York, we are cited by the Centre of Cities as being the most inequitable city outside of London, and we know across our city in itself that issues around mortality differentiate so vastly. Clifton, people die a lot younger than they will at Weldrake, and therefore we've got inequality, whether it's economic, social, health inequalities, are here on our doorstep, and we have to mend that divide. And therefore we have been clear, first of all, on jobs, ensuring that we invest in properly paid, secure employment in the future. And that's why I fight for the York Central site, because the connectivity is the power of that site. And yet the council are choking off the economic opportunity where we could be leading the nation's bioscience industry, creating high quality jobs which pay well, which this city doesn't have. Secondly, we need to ensure that our public services are properly funded. Our schools have been pared back so tightly. We were the worst funded schools in the country, now the 4th worst funded schools in the country. And thirdly, I would say our NHS. I've been fighting the mental health service run by the GPs, which is being shut down, not just cut, shut down, when we have got real mental health challenges across York. And therefore we need to ensure that we put the right investment in the right places. Having a strong economy, which is what Labour wants, will be built on putting the investment in the right place, increasing productivity, which has failed over the last decade, overturning austerity, which has hurt so many people, and ensuring them that we can invest in our public services so they work for the whole of society.
Thank you very much. I think I'll ask Fabian if you might respond to that question, please.
So we're the party of the working people and the party of aspiration. So what we are offering is to reward those that are the hard-working people by increasing minimum wage and the living wage to £10.50, which is going to be a 4,000 pay rise for everyone on that wage, which makes a huge difference to everyone. We're also going to be supporting businesses to enable more jobs for people, and especially people coming out of school. And we're really looking at the way we approach our schooling system. So it's not just about the academic process. We're introducing T-levels, which are more vocational courses, so that you don't just have to stick down the same routes that we've been going through. We're also going to be investing in more housing and more affordable housing, so there should be 250,000 more affordable housing homes built in the next 4 years. So that's going to make a real difference, because it's about getting people into jobs, having the jobs for them to take, and getting on that first ladder on the housing market.
Thank you very much.
Just managed.
Sorry, thank you, James.
Well, we've got a massively unbalanced economy in this country when you compare us to other European countries. And it's a problem I sometimes call a problem with capitalism. Not the kind of capitalism that you'll often hear Labour and the Conservatives talking about. It's a problem with our capital city, London. Now, those who've studied the history will know that London was just a fort built by the Romans to occupy this island 2,000 years ago. And it's basically been doing that job ever since, just sucking the life out of us up here. If you look at the funding that London effectively gives itself, as we've already heard, their education, the average school gets about 50% more than our schools do. If you've ever got a London bus, you'll quite understand that they get about 20 times as much money to spend on their local transport as we do, and we need to change this. The Liberal Democrats have long argued for regional devolution, not just for Yorkshire, but to every part of our country. We want to see people set free so that the taxation that you pay is spent locally by people you can lobby and who can actually see and understand the problems that they have locally. Because the problem we have is that from London, it's awfully hard to hide, awfully easy to hide, the problems we have in York. It's easy to hide poverty. It's easy to hide the problem with our schools and with our hospitals. That needs to change. The Liberal Democrats have announced a 50 billion rebalancing fund for the entire country outside of the southeast to get money where it's needed so that we can get more things like the wind turbine factory we have in Hull, which was first started up under the coalition and is producing great jobs locally, but also is giving us a future of carbon-free electricity. Last of all, I think we have to actually listen to young people and honour you a lot more than we have in the political discourse as we do now. I've always argued for votes at 16 because I think you need to be heard. And I think as well as that... Okay, I'll stop there.
Thank you very much indeed. The other candidates have just very quick, if you're welcome. Yep.
Yeah. There really is a divide. There's a huge difference between those who are doing well in this country and those who are not doing well in this country. And there is a massive, not so much north-south divide, but a London versus the rest divide. And it's because of the massive size and power of London. This will not change unless we regionalise the country. We need to bring power and responsibility and action under transparent funding formulas, like the Scots have got, into Yorkshire. So then we can start to deal with the issues here in the way that will be most effective here, not a one-size-fits-all from Westminster.
Thank you very much.
I think in contrast to the Conservatives, we believe in redistribution to an extent, but we also believe there's the importance of freedom and the importance of economic prosperity as well. We want to be compassionate and competitive. So we've got policies to put up the top rate of tax, but we're not putting it up to a massive amount. We think that Labour's plans, we'd put it up to 47% to fund things like the NHS, to eradicate homelessness and to improve the education system. But again, like I said, we want to eradicate the serious social problems. We want to support people on low wages, but we also recognise that we need to help the economy, and to do that, you don't want to be stifling it with national debt and overspending, which the country can't afford. And we'll push a burden of taxation. Whatever Jeremy Corbyn says, it will push a burden of taxation on people who earn less than £80,000 a year.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay, addressing inequality, I think the first thing we want to do is universal basic income. So every adult, 18 to 65, will get £89. Everybody over 65, 178, because this would replace, among other things, the pension and universal credit. That will go a big way towards dealing with economic inequality, because everybody would have something. We also want to simplify the tax system. At the moment, if you earn your money by working, you pay tax at a higher rate because you pay national insurance on top than if you have your income unearned. So by making all income tax the same, that will be much fairer, and those who currently don't necessarily pay the highest rate of tax because they're not paying national insurance at the top of their earnings or on their unearned income will be paying more. But I think we need to recognise that actually much of the inequality we face now has been a deliberate choice of the current government and its predecessors, with the Lib Dem coalition. They deliberately put in place austerity, and that built inequality, more inequality into the system, and we have to address that by reversing the austerity that was put there.
Thank you very much. Nicholas.
If we were to spend hours rather than minutes discussing some of these things, you'd find there's a lot of common denominators between the different candidates, and I believe that there is a great deal more cooperation needed between the creative thinkers within all parties if we're to find solutions to the problems of inequality. I'm going to give you just one example of the sort of area where we don't have joined-up thinking. Two of my family are North Yorkshire police officers. The North Yorkshire police are spending almost as much time dealing with issues to do with mental care as they are to do with fighting crime. Unless we deal with problems in some of the pressing issues of our day, like mental health care, we don't see the reciprocal benefit in other areas. So, for example, just to have a headline policy of we'll have 20,000 more police officers, obviously that would create more jobs, more income for people. I mean, my two kids laughed when they heard it. You know, how you're going to suddenly magic up 20,000 officers? Actually, if we just utilize the officers that we have in the areas of their specialism, that would be a problem solved. But because of underfunding in mental health care, where wages have been low, the whole area has been neglected, we've pushed a problem elsewhere. So it's joined up thinking from people who really understand the issues that's required if we're ever to make progress in that area.
Thank you very much. You'll notice on the bottom of the screen there is a hashtag Bootham Debates, which is not being used at the moment. It's lonely. It needs your help. If you would like to tweet your views, legal, decent, honest and truthful, please, please do so. And if we get any decent ones, we may stick them up on the screen later. It would be good to actually tweet out from here. Should say that we're working this evening also with York Mix, who have been live blogging this event. If you can do that, look at that on your phones if you'd like, or you can read it when you get home. But please do participate if you'd like to. Next question is a question that is very important to many of the students at school, and I haven't got the name at the moment, James, of the person who's going to ask this for us. Can you send it my way? So, Maya James, where's Maya James? Maya, would you like to ask your question? Can we throw the box in your direction? Here it comes. Very good. Round of applause for Luke, please. That was very impressive. He holds the world record in microphone throwing, I think.
Hi. I'm concerned about the future of the planet. Having just returned from India, I've started to see the impact that a country of 1.3 billion people can have on our fragile world. This is a global problem, and it can't be solved by UK initiatives, which, in my opinion, just scrape at the surface. What will your party do to find global solutions to preserve and improve the world for future generations?
So that's the key question. What will your party do to provide global solutions or find global solutions? That's the key question. Tom.
Okay, so there's two things straight off that come to mind. The first one is we want to increase international aid from 0.7% of GDP to 1%, and a lot of that additional aid will go on supporting countries to become carbon neutral. So that will put funding where it's needed. We also actually want to take a lot of the money that's misused in aid in things like where big dam projects which destroy the environment, or where it's a requirement that you buy British because it's subsidy to British industry rather than actually meeting the needs of the people it's supposed to be supporting. So there's scope there as well. So we need to put a lot more aid into supporting countries doing it. Secondly, we want a carbon tax, because at the moment, and that will be charged on carbon used in the UK, but also if you import something, in the embedded carbon in what you import. So if you import steel, there will be a carbon tax relating to the amount of carbon used in producing it. This will encourage all producers, whether they're in the UK or elsewhere, to reduce the amount of carbon in whatever it is that they're producing. So I think there's a sort of two major international. Obviously, we want to push higher standards. We need to deal with the airline industry. We need to deal with shipping, both of which are huge producers. We need to change the diet. We need to work with countries like Brazil, which is going to be difficult at the moment, to preserve the Amazon. But so there will be a lot of stuff working with other countries to do what is needed and changing international treaties as well, which will be difficult. There's no, I can't pretend, I can't solve it like that, but that's where we need to put work in, as well as leading from here.
Thank you. Nicholas.
This is a subject which is of particular interest to those whose future our policies will inherit. Most people that I speak to don't even understand the science of what we're talking about. I asked a couple of people the other day who were vocal about climate. Well, how much carbon dioxide is there in the atmosphere? They didn't know. I said it's about 400 parts per million. And when you breathe out, it's about 38,000 parts per million. Carbon is not the only issue. If we have policies which globalists and our governments have subscribed to, which are utterly ridiculous. So, for example, down the road at Drax Power Station, it's burning biomass. We need to grow trees in order to take in carbon and to exhale oxygen. What are we doing? We're growing millions of trees around the world, in Latvia, in Portugal, the United States and Canada, to harvest with diesel machines, bring here on diesel ships, unload at Liverpool and burn on top of the Selby coalfield. We're a nation of great innovators, and we can come up with innovative solutions to deal with the problem of pollution, which is, I believe, a huge problem, and also of our changing climate. One of the things which never changes is the influence of the moon on our waters. There is limitless tidal power available if only we have the technology, and it doesn't generate carbon. There are so many ways we could lead the world as innovators, but we need to stop this ridiculous policy that we have of growing simply to burn. It just doesn't make sense.
Any more for any more? Rachel.
We have to absolutely look at our lifestyles and our consumption as a nation, not just as individuals, and I try and live the greenest way that I possibly can. But we have to look at the way that we're steering that, and that's the role of government. But it's incredibly arrogant if the UK government believes that it will lead the world, because we have to work in collaboration with so many other nations on this agenda. If we look at the agreement that was struck in Paris, that was a great agreement, but unless it's adhered to, then it is not worth the paper it's written on. And of course, this government are failing to reach their fourth carbon budget and the fifth carbon budget, and certainly 1.5 degree rise in temperature will be catastrophic. And therefore, we have to be really serious about that. Labour's setting out a green industrial revolution, about leading a way forward for our country, but also to share best practice around the world and to listen to others which are leading the way, to create jobs which are about mitigation, but also about driving a different alternative moving forward. But if we're going to see real climate justice, we have to take that global approach, and therefore ensuring that we address issues like floods and famine, but also conflict, which we also know is a massive issue in itself. And therefore, we have to look at how we work in cooperation and collaboration through global agreements. And I think that's where our strength of the European Union sits, is because we can work across a bloc of 28 countries, but then also we need to see this as a real human rights issue as we move forward. Climate justice is about everybody's justice, and therefore we've got to take that forward as a global priority.
Thank you. So the question was about international cooperation, and as I said in my opening statement, this is one of the key reasons we've got to get rid of Brexit, because we do need to work together internationally. And so much of the Brexit campaign was about rolling back on a lot of regulations, red tape as they like to call it, things that get in the way, things like health and safety, things like environmental regulations, which you don't appreciate until you've missed them. Now, when I was a young person in the 80s, we had chlorofluorocarbons in our fridges, which were destroying the ozone layer. We had acid rain coming out of our coal-fired power stations, which were deforesting Sweden, Norway, Germany. And it was through international cooperation which we were able to stop that from happening. You don't hear about acid rain now, And the ozone layer, the hole in it, is as small as it's been since it was first actually identified. That was done through international cooperation, and that has to be the way we carry on, because we're not going to actually change the world if we retreat to our small island. Britain's always been at its best when it's been outward looking, going out there, and that's what I want to do. Because if we're talking about flights, if we're talking about taxation rules, if we're talking about manufacturing standards, to be quite honest, it matters that we change the world's playbook, not just Britain's, because we will be changing too little to impact the world. But there is something that we can do here in Yorkshire, which is really good. I mentioned the wind turbines which are produced in Hull. Now, we can export electricity, green electricity, to our neighbours in Europe through that production. We can export the produced wind turbines themselves, but we are going to need access to European markets to do that. So, for God's sake, for the planet's sake, please let's do that.
The STP's policy document emphasises economic incentives for business, and economic incentives for individuals, as well as tough laws where necessary to try and encourage environmentally friendly behaviour and discourage or ban environmentally unfriendly behaviour. That's all really I've got to say. Apart from, I think Britain can be an independent country without, and still be doing all that it can on a global level and as a country to help the environment. I don't see it as an EU-related issue. I think it's perfectly okay for us to run our own affairs and not make laws in conjunction with the people of Luxembourg and France, and we can still do the same for the environment that we would otherwise if we were in the EU.
Thank you. Understand.
We do two things day two. First is declare a Yorkshire-wide climate emergency. And the second thing would be to confirm a ban on fracking across the county. Now, what can't we do? Let's be honest. Britain's emissions are around 1.2% of global emissions. China's are around 28%. So we can't save the planet on our own. But we can do three things that are vital. We can provide a moral imperative for others to join us in reducing emissions at a decent rate. We can provide a powerful example to others as to how we can do that. And we can enable UK soft power to bring pressure to bear on the really big emitters. There's probably massive agreement across this table as to what we actually need to do in this country. We need to remove internal combustion vehicles, cars, trucks, buses, taxis, trains off the agenda. We need to have electrical vehicles, maybe powered hydrogen, as well as battery. We need to remove household gas boilers and properly insulate our largely Victorian housing stock. We need to have no more carbon-based power generation, and we're getting to a position where we could actually do that quite quickly. We need to plant millions and millions of trees, and we need to provide funding for interesting new science. For instance, I was reading recently about an E. coli bacteria, which has been metabolically rewired to consume carbon dioxide, just like plants. So there's a lot we can do, there's a lot we should do, and we need to really get on and do it.
Have you a comment?
That's really gone now. Sorry. So I think this is absolutely one of the most important issues we're facing it, and we can't face it alone. If we're going to tackle climate change, it has to be a global move. But I don't think it's arrogant that as Conservatives we want to be leading the way. I think it's setting an example rather than saying, oh, everyone should follow Britain. But unless we use our influence on the world, then I don't see other countries taking that stand. And last year I spent a year working in Australia, and they introduced a plastic bag ban out there, And it didn't have the public support and the appetite that the bans on single-use plastic that we've introduced in this country have been accepted. And actually the supermarkets which did ban had to relegate on that promise, and then I think they're reintroducing it sometime soon. But one of the things I'm really pleased about the Conservative manifesto is the 18 billion we're putting towards investing in research and development and innovation. Because if we want to go green, we have to have the infrastructure to support it and be investing in ways that we can revolutionize the environmental market. So, I mean, we've seen battery storage in the last 10 years just get better and better, and that has seen our move to 30%, I think 37% electric now being generated from renewables in the last 9 years. And so long as we can build on these, we can build on these ideas, and they will also be accepted globally. I was really pleased that the Conservatives introduced a moratorium on fracking, and I'd love to say it's because of its eco agenda, but I think partly it's because it doesn't make financial sense. And the more we can push green measures economically, the more the rest of the world will catch on.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for... yes, you did ask the question, so please do have a comeback if you'd like it.
Hello. I think it is about international cooperation, and I think what Andrew said, absolutely, they're all things that we all agree with. But I guess what I'd say is that we can do all these things in the UK, and the planet will still die. And I think that's the thing we've got to know, is that India, China, Asia, they're going to kill, the planet's going to die, and it's all about international cooperation. And I think that the investment in innovation needs to be investing in things that we can export to these developing countries. If you remember, in India, they didn't go landlines, they went straight to mobiles. This is what we've got to do. We've got to get India, China going straight to tide power. We've got to go straight to wind farms. That's where we need to be the investment, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We haven't got the time. We have a tweet that has come in from @AntDavid, which I'm going to leave as another rhetorical question, which says this: what if I agree with a lot of what the panelists have said, but I don't trust their party leaders? Should I vote for policy or personality? So I'll just leave that one hanging in the air. We've got time for 2 more questions. We're going to move from the global to the local. We have a question from Theo McCartney. Go on, get us an overarm. That's the way. Almost perfect. I think this has been a spectacularly successful part of the evening, I have to say.
Yes, I know. How wonderful. What are the local issues for York in this election?
What are the local issues for York in this election? Anyone want to go first who hasn't had a chance to go first yet? Nicholas.
One of the primary ones I do as part of my work, travel all around the world, has to be transportation. I go to cities in the world which are old, ancient like ours, where they have solved it by the use of, for example, trams, electrically powered, fabulous public transport systems. That means there's just no real incentive to bring your car into the city. I think so for me, one of the primary things would be to unblock the arteries of movement of people and goods in and out of this city. That will require enormous investment, bearing in mind the precious heritage of the city and its importance as a tourism destination. We have to do that very carefully. But for me, if we're going to oil the wheels of the economy and of industry and commerce in the city, we have to solve the transport problem, particularly the road transport problem, and introduce an innovative, new, well-invested public transport system, mass transit system, so people can get in and out of here quickly.
Thank you very much. Anybody else on local issues? Tom.
So a lot of the issues that are local are also national, but I will start with one that I think is perhaps affects York more than others, and that is actually that we're losing a lot of jobs, and we're seeing places replaced by hotels. We're seeing a hollowing out of decent jobs in a lot of low-paid, and part-time and zero-hours jobs come. I mean, it's not just York. There are very few problems, I think, which only apply to York. But that is a big one that we need to address by bringing in better jobs and ensuring that we're not actually just thinking about low-paying tourism. We need to think that if we are going to have tourism, we're a fantastic city and fantastic place to visit, but we actually have a relatively low spend per tourist. We need to think about how we can change that. Not have more and more tourists crowding the place out, but how we can actually have tourists have a more interesting and vital experience and bring more money into the city that way. I mean, other problems that I listed, I mean, we've heard transport, but health is a huge problem with the cuts we've seen. We've seen the sort of closure of Bootham Park Hospital. We've seen other closures as well. Mental health is a really serious issue locally as a result. Provision is extremely poor, even by the extremely poor national standards. And the climate emergency, you know, we're a very low-lying town. Most of the town is below 10 metres. Sea level is going to rise 10 metres. Most of York is going to be underwater if we don't solve climate emergency. That's a pretty local problem.
Thank you. Any more answers? James?
Well, I've already talked about how London in the southeast is taking too much out of this country, and as a result, places like York aren't getting their fair share. I think we need somebody to go to Westminster and fight for the money so that our schools are getting something similar to what kids in London are getting, so that our transport system can be brought up to scratch. And I think mental health is particularly important here because we know about the loss of the Bootham facility. The York Hospital itself as well is being run down in comparison to the big hospitals in Leeds and in Middlesbrough. And what the Liberal Democrats have been very clear about is that we need to bring mental health provision up to the same quality of esteem that physical health is. And that means spending a lot of money and being honest about with you where that money is coming from, which is why we're proposing to put a penny on income tax, because that's the kind of money it will take to solve a mental health crisis, which is particularly affecting young people in this country. You won't be surprised to hear me say that Brexit is a local issue as well. York has got the highest proportion of its exports going into the European Union for the whole of the north of England. So that means it will be hit the hardest as well. And if we want those decent paying jobs, then we need to make sure that those decent paying jobs can get goods to market. Otherwise, it's all words. And on top of that, we've got two great universities in York, which rely on people coming from overseas to study, to learn, and to teach. And if we can't have visas that allow people to do that and pay the kind of tuition that overseas students do the kind of research that we need to solve things like our environmental crisis, then we are going to lose out massively here locally as well.
Thank you very much.
The biggest issue that impacts on our city is housing. We are seeing more and more luxury flats being built across the city, which quite frankly most local people can't afford, and yet we have got a housing crisis. We are seeing our social housing stock depleted, and therefore that is why Labour has set out an ambitious programme, and we make no apologies for that, of building council houses to sell as well as to rent, to ensure that everybody has that human right, human justice of being able to have a house they can afford to live in. 125,000 children this Christmas will not be spending Christmas in their own home, and that is, in one of the richest countries in the world, is a catastrophe. And it's here in York too. I've supported families squashed in a single box room living here in the city. I visit families that cannot afford to feed their kids here in the city, and therefore we've got to address the inequality that we're seeing on our doorstep. I would also say we've got to get upstream. We hear this list these shopping lists of policies, but unless we make the investment upstream, particularly around public health, making sure people stay well for longer, as opposed to having to depend on acute services, it does make such a difference. So a youth service in York, which has been cut, we need to ensure our public health budget is supported and not cut. And we need to see that investment. And to see an investment in jobs means we have to have a a comprehensive economic strategy for the city. We don't. And therefore, these are the priorities, understanding the problems, doing the analysis, and then putting in the solutions behind that. There are many challenges in York, and I believe they can be solved if there are the minds to do that. And Labour certainly has the ambition to do that for this city.
Thank you. Andrew Snowden.
Well, we want to put a Yorkshire Assembly in York. Somewhere near Clifford's Tower would be quite nice. In the Eye of York, I think that would, well, the clue's in the name, isn't it? Yorkshire. Anyway, a lot of the things that Rachel's been talking about would be much less of a problem if we had control over our own budgets for health, for transport, for education, for housing, so that local people who knew local conditions could have an equitable sum of money to spend wisely where it needs to be spent here. That would be of huge benefit to York. We've got a couple of other things that would be, I think, helpful. We really need to sort out where we're going to have our main traffic arteries and properly have dual carriageway roads wherever possible. The Outer Ring Road was first begun when I lived here before, in Jurassic times. And I still can't believe, about a third of it is single lane only. We knew that was a joke the day it opened. We should do something about that. We should also do something about vehicular accessibility down past the hospital. That's a nightmare. I live near there. We should pedestrianise more of the centre, but being careful not to disadvantage shopkeepers. We have this fabulous historic city centre. If it was France, you wouldn't have a vehicle down there, during daylight hours. I suggest we also want only electric vehicles running through the centre of York, including buses and vans. Yeah, that's enough.
It's going to keep us going for a while, I think. Andrew, briefly, and then
some of the things that have already been mentioned are covered in our policy documents, and things like giving mental health the same status as physical health, tackling homelessness, specifically for York. This isn't mentioned, but flood defence is very important. But like James was saying, I think that some of these things are national issues. Some of these things are to do with also getting a fairer share of the Westminster money for this particular locality.
Fabian.
Local issues. I think we need to massively invest in more housing, but also there are 500 houses in the last year in York that haven't been lived in, whether they're second homes or ones people want to rent out. And I think we really need to address that, because there's no point in building more houses when we already have the infrastructure to support people. So let's get those houses and let's address that on a local level. At the moment, the council are charging 200% council tax on those properties. But if you can afford to have your home empty, I'm pretty sure you can afford that. So we need to be addressing that and stopping these spaces being empty. Part of the issue of the voice is I've been up in the mornings leafleting the train stations. And we have some of the highest educated people in York getting on the trains and going off to Leeds to work. And we've got to attract business here so that those people aren't leaving, that actually we see the people coming from Leeds into York. So I would like to address that. And also, I would like to see York leading the green revolution across the UK, because we have the appetite here. And that means better and greener public transport. The Conservative manifesto is pushing on-demand buses, so they're more flexible. I mean, I know we've got the Uber software and technology that allows for pooling, and I don't see why we're not pushing that in our public transport as well. I'd like to see more charging points for electric cars so that we actually have the infrastructure to support them. I'd like to introduce a bike sharing like they do in London and now in Oxford, and actually lead the way with banning gas boilers by 2025 rather than by 2030, because York is an amazing city and we can make it even better, and we can show the rest of the UK what we can achieve.
Thank you very much indeed. Another tweet from @SpitfireDave, who says, refreshing to hear honest opinion, not just party lines. There we go. We've got probably time for one more major topic this evening, and then I've got a sort of short question, then we'll have summing up. And whilst you are polling, we will have a sort of vaguely comedy question at the end, just to lighten the mood a little. So could we have the next question, please, from Howard Smith? Where's Howard? Oh,
thank you. Good evening. I'm a former NHS nurse and development manager. I'm extremely worried about the sort of looming crisis there is with social care and healthcare. And this question really covers some of that. There are currently 42,000 nursing NHS vacancies, and recruitment is in crisis. How will your party improve the provision, performance and recruitment of nursing in the NHS?
So how will your party improve the provision, performance and recruitment of nursing in the NHS? Has been a big topic in the debate. Who would like to go first with this one? Any takers? Andrew?
Well, my party is strongly committed to the NHS. There was a period in our history, probably from just after Tony Blair came into power, for the 10 years then, when actually NHS funding went up impressively year on year. And I think that that's fallen back, obviously, with austerity and with the Conservative government and the coalition. But I think really all of these health issues, for example, not being able to see your GP for 2 weeks, things like that, are solved by that kind of those kind of bigger funding issues. But one of the little things that our party has done is to say, you know, to want to be committed to training more nurses in this country, and also committing to being able to become a nurse without having a degree and things like that. Okay.
Thank you very much. Any more takers for the question on the NHS? Rachel?
Thank you for your question. I spent 20 years working in the NHS, and it breaks my heart to see us going back to what it was like in the 1990s, where nurses were working double shifts, and I remember hardly ever going home, being on call all night. And certainly the situation won't be solved by just throwing money at the problem. We really have to invest in health, particularly public health, to ensure that we stay healthier for longer. We have to join up health and social care. Part of the challenges across the health service is because we do not have a comprehensive care system, and that means we need to bring our care workers into a professional role to ensure that they're properly regulated, trained, supported in their role. But also the NHS isn't just about the silos of occupations which we've seen over the years. Nurse practitioners very much can lead in their specialism, and we need to empower them to do that and to ensure other people can take that full role. So investing in education is really important. Agenda for Change was set up so that you can move, and these were the terms that was used at the time, to be a porter to a surgeon and to move through that process. Agenda for Change is fit for purpose, but the knowledge and skills framework needs to be brought to the fore by properly funding it across the health service. With the cut of nurses' bursaries, we've certainly seen a downturn in the number of applicants to nursing and other allied health professionals. And it's absolutely vital that we see the return, as Labour would, into that, because it also attracted mature students, so people had life behind them moving into the NHS, as well as people moving from the ground. Look, I can talk about it all night, but one thing I want to end on is we need proper workforce planning across the health service. They do that in Scotland in collaboration with the trade unions, and it works, and we need to do that here across the rest of England and the UK.
Okay, so on nursing provision.
Thank you. I'm an NHS worker as well, so I know a lot about where you're coming from. As I said in my opening speech, the day before the referendum, we had 1,300 nurses applying from the EU to work here. Within a year, that was down to 46 a month, I think it was. And that's been a critical part of the problem, because the Conservative response to that decline in overseas applications was to slash bursaries, the money given to student nurses to be able to live in order to be able to train. Now, the Liberal Democrats want to reverse that by giving everybody, not just young people, a lifelong skills wallet, we're calling it, so that you've got the money to spend on education throughout your life. That's going to be really important because technology is rapidly changing our workforces. And I think about the career my dad had. He only really worked at one employee, he only really worked in one job. Same could be said for my mum as well. I've already worked in 3 or 4, and I can't imagine that I won't be moving on as well as technology advances. The problem isn't just nurses. There's a massive problem with GP recruitment as well, with the majority of GPs are due to retire within the next 10 years, I think it is. Then try and get your appointment, I think. My role in the NHS is all around getting technology into patients' hands, and I think that's vitally important because we've been able to show time and time again that if you're somebody with a lifelong condition such as diabetes, if you're given the information about how you as an individual are progressing with your condition, you are much better to manage it yourself and to stay healthy for longer. And ultimately that's about keeping it cheaper.
Can we stick to nursing? Is that
Sorry.
right? Stick to the nursing thing.
Sorry.
That was the question was about, if we can. Thank you. Anyone else on the issue of nursing? Nicholas?
Yes, well, I'm not an NHS expert, although having been a beneficiary for many years with my disabled daughter of the wonderful work of the NHS, it's something I feel passionately about. The Brexit Party's policy would be to reopen the nursing and midwifery professions to recruitment without a degree qualification, alongside a new nursing qualification in social care. One of the millstones that's been around the NHS's neck is New Labour's flagship policy of the Private Finance Initiative. That 13 billion that was invested in new hospitals will ultimately cost the taxpayer 80 billion by the time it's paid back. One of the policies that I would vote for would be basically for those schemes to be bought out. You know, the interest rates on government borrowing are tiny compared to the interest rates being paid out on PFI. Those huge savings, and it's millions of pounds, can be put into investment in nurses in bursaries, etc. One of the other policies that relates to that, which would directly influence the work of nurses, would be the introduction of 24-hour GP surgeries, so that would relieve the strain on A&E departments. And finally, I think we need to have a cross-party national debate that involves the public alongside nurses, doctors and experts, and ring-fencing the NHS budget and the tax revenue that will ultimately have to pay for it.
Thank you very much. Any more for any more? Tom, do you want to?
I agree with quite a few of the things that have been said. So Brexit will make a huge difference. If we cancel Brexit, we will be able to get people in. We do need to put some more money in. It's not the only solution, but it is part of it. Retention hasn't been mentioned, and that is hugely important, and that may mean changing way people are obliged to work, because obviously you do need shift working in, but thinking about maybe people would be interested in different ways of working or different forms of working could help retention. We've got a falling life expectancy in the UK, and so we need to actually think about public health as well, and people not getting sick, which would reduce the load on nurses. We want to abolish all student fees and cancel existing student debt, so that would maybe encourage more people to study nursing, because they wouldn't be building up huge debts, and with the UBI they would also have something to live on while they were studying. So I think those were the points I wanted to cover.
Thank you very much, Fabian.
Brexit will have an impact on nursing, because rather than just looking to the EU, we can look beyond and look globally. And our Australian point-based system will enable nurses to come from around the world and help the shortfall in nurses at the moment. But we're also going to be introducing grants for training, which will help with whilst nurses are in training, and hopefully keep them there. But there are issues with the NHS, and it is something we can't just throw money at, but I do think putting more money into the NHS so we can have more services and attract the pressures that are on the A&E departments to where they need to be, with more GPs, more innovative ways of interacting with the NHS, like phone and not FaceTime appointments, but using more innovative methods like that. And we also need to look at the NHS with a long-term view, because there are going to be more pressures on the NHS over the next 20 years, and we need to be planning to meet those demands now, rather than addressing the problems when they arise.
Thank you very much. Andrew, finally.
The shocking thing about all of this to me is that it's been acceptable for so long for vital public services to be understaffed by tens of thousands of people, not just nurses, but doctors, even teachers, it's rumoured. If we had our own transparent budgets here, we would be able to deal with this problem if those budgets were then transparent and equitable. At the moment, the North in general and Yorkshire in particular do not get fair funding. If we did, we'd have a much better chance of solving some of these problems.
Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to take my life into my hands. I'm going to ask for one more question. I'm going to ask the panellists to give me one word only. These are politicians. One word only in answer to this particular question. So, Paul Van Dam, do you have a question? Where's Paul? Where's the magic box? Yeah, it's good. You're doing a good job. Oh.
Okay. Do the panel agree that all of the stand-aside agreements in place for this election are undermining democracy?
So does the panel agree that all of the stand-aside agreements in place for this election are undermining democracy? I'm just going to go from one end to the other, and I want one word, because we haven't got much more time.
Can I make my one word? If only we had proportional representation.
That's not a word. That's a bad start. That's a bad start. We can count to one at Bootham, so let's go for one.
Okay. Not.
One word?
No.
No?
PR.
Okay. Slightly, thank you.
Labour's going to win, so it's irrelevant.
PR.
PR.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, good. I'll look back at the question to see if you can relate the answers you just heard to the question in front of you. Okay, I'm going to ask each of the candidates, without having to get them up to the lectern again, to sum up in 30 seconds, and the counter is up on the screen for them to see up there, why you should vote for them. So let's go in reverse order of our original, and James is going to put this up on the screen for me at some particular point, but I know we're starting with Rachel. 30 seconds, Rachel, starting from now.
Thank you for this evening. Let us end a decade of austerity and bring this Brexit debate to an end through a final say. We, on Thursday, have the opportunity to reinvest in our economy, rebuild our society, restore our environment, and rescue our NHS. On Thursday, this country can have a fresh beginning, a new start, and the power for that sits in your hands. So I encourage you to vote for Labour's strong manifesto for real change at the general election 2019.
Thank you very much. Tom Franklin, go. Go.
I'm under no illusion Rachel Maskell is going to win in York Central. However, there's a climate emergency. In 2015, UKIP got 3 million votes and it changed the conversation. We need to get 3 million votes to the Green Party and ensure that the climate emergency is taken seriously by whatever government is elected, because if it isn't, we are all in dire, dire trouble. So vote Green, send that message.
Thank you very much. Nicholas Skeeler.
The malaise that you have seen in our political life is symptomatic of a malaise that we've seen in our society in general. And that has to do with values, democracy, truth, decency, and integrity. We need more truth, we need more transparency, and above all else, we need to remove a whole tier of career politicians.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Andrew Snedden.
So, is this just another Brexit election? A Groundhog Day election? And then what? Our democracy is broken. Without democratic decentralisation, we will be back here next election with the same issues, the same broken promises, the same Groundhog Day politics. We can do better than this. If you're politically fed up, send a message and invest in a real future. No more Cinderella Shire. Vote for a Yorkshire Assembly in a fairer England. Thank you.
James Blanchard.
Thank you. Tonight we've talked about democracy, we've talked about nursing, climate change, our regional inequalities, education and housing. None of those things are going to be made easier by Brexit and by us turning our backs on the rest of the world. Please say no to throwing away the next decade or two while we try to work out what we do, and just let's concentrate on what you here tonight have said is the important issues of the day.
Thank you very much. Andrew Dunn, 30 seconds.
Right. We can tackle social problems like street homelessness and people needing food banks, and we can properly fund the NHS without overburdening ourselves with taxation, without getting the country into debt. The SDP want to fill the vacated middle ground in politics, and they also want to honour the referendum because 17.4 million voted for it, and it would be an absolute disgrace in British democracy if that referendum wasn't enacted.
Thank you very much indeed. And Fabia Tate.
So this evening you've heard about why you should vote for the Conservatives, but this is about why you should vote for me. And that's because I promised to work tirelessly for York. And that means for every resident of York. Whether you vote for me or whether you don't vote for me, I'm here to represent you. And I will go into Westminster and I'll knock on every minister's door I have to and chase MPs down the corridors, work cross-party and with local and national organisations to ensure that York becomes an even better place to live.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you to all our candidates for all they've done so far. I have one more question for them to sort of fill the void whilst you are polling again. So this is the time for you to take those little cards and do whatever you are asked to do with those, which is a mystery to me, and cast your vote at the end of this particular debate as you see fit, and then we will present those. In the meanwhile, I have a question for all the candidates to answer, which will tax their powers of imagination. And the answer, I will be in Westminster, so this doesn't apply to me, does not count in answer to this question. Friday is our annual Bootham Christmas Cabaret. Imagine that you are celebrating winning the election on Friday and decide that you will offer us an act. What would that act be? So I'm going to give you about 20 seconds to try and be funny, and we're going to go from there. So what act would you perform in our Christmas cabaret in celebration of your stunning election victory on Thursday night? Let's start with James.
Okay, I guess from York, got an interest in the Houses of Parliament, got an interest in keeping politicians honest. I'd probably do a song and dance routine based on the life and times of Guy Fawkes.
Okay, very good. I look forward to that one already. Andrew?
I think this would reflect the chances of the SDP actually winning this seat, which are pretty much as close to zero as it gets. I think it'd have to be a magic act because that's the only way we're going to win anything.
I asked for honesty. I love it. Thank you very much. Tom?
Okay, this is embarrassing. The only cabaret act I've ever done was when, I can't even remember what the film is called now, came out, and I was raising funds for Leonard Cheshire for Uganda, and I did a strip. So that is the only cabaret act I've ever done. I can't dance, I can't sing, and you don't want me to strip.
Certainly not in a school. I think that wouldn't be at all appropriate. Rachel?
I think I'm going to leave if Tom... I think our spirits are going to be so high that we're going to have a collective sing because we're going to be celebrating that Labour victory together.
Red flag?
Of course.
Of course, and why not? Andrew?
Well, I think I'd have to do a one-man show of the four Yorkshiremen in an Australian accent.
Thank you. Do you mind if we call you Bruce just to clear up the confusion for those of you who know Monty Python? Thank you. Nicholas?
Well, I cut my teeth as a DJ from the age of 16, so I could probably play some tracks, but bearing in mind what might happen on Thursday, I'd probably reprise my role as a moth in the insect play. Into it, wing your flight into the ecstasy into the heart of the light. We're struck from above. Again, we expire. Each is a part of the infinite fire.
Poetry, beat that.
So I love learning new skills. And this year, I've learned how to stilt walk and fire juggle. So I would definitely, I'm not sure, I haven't tried to do both at the same time, and I think that would be slightly dangerous. But I would like to be showing off my fire juggling skills.
Thank you very much indeed. I think we should get these guys in on Friday, because this could be, well, all except one. Yes. I think this could be worth it.
Not Tom.
No, exactly that.
The film was the Full Monty, and it was a fundraising event in Sheffield.
You can keep your hat on. Okay, I don't know whether, James, are we ready to have the poll yet? We're not quite. We're nearly there. So I would like to say thank you at this particular point where we're sort of filling in time to all of you for turning up this evening, for all of you listening patiently, particularly some of the young people who it's way past their bedtime, as it is mine. Thank you so much for your presence here this evening. I hope it's been helpful to you. I hope it might even have helped you know how to vote either on Thursday in the general election or in the Bootham School equivalent, which we're going to do here as we always do. So thank you for coming. Thank you to all our candidates for participating this evening in very good spirit. I think you'll agree that it's been a very well-mannered discussion, and I think a lot of our politicians nationwide could learn a great deal from the people we've had this evening. So thank you to Fabia and to Nicholas and to Andrew and to Rachel and to Tom and to other Andrew and to James. Thank you and very well done. I extend a thank you also to those people who've helped put this extravaganza, this multimedia extravaganza on this evening. I'd like to say thank you to the members of particularly the Bootham Sixth Form College politics group who are involved in this. I'd like to thank the young people who've been helping our technicians. I'd like to thank Luke and Alex for all the work they've done in making this look fab, and particularly James Ratcliffe, who is my assistant head in charge of enrichment at this particular school, for doing such a great job in putting this event on. So can we thank them as well? And Nell is lurking by the Christmas tree, so let's ask her to come forward and give us a very quick look at whether we've ended up with something different and whether anybody has managed to cheat this year like they did last time.
So I won't talk for too long, and I'll just go through the polls very quickly. So I think I've got the updated version. I hope so anyway. So to start, voting intention by the end of the poll, as you can see, Labour and the Liberal Democrats are actually neck and neck at 25.7% of the vote, closely followed by the Green Party with 20.3% of the vote, then the Yorkshire Party with 12.2% of the vote.
Let's wait for the next election.
Well, next June.
Then followed by the Conservative Party with 9.5%, and then the SDP with 4.1%, followed by the Brexit Party at 1.4%, and those who again chose to vote for other people as well at 1.4%. So to move on to the next graph, this kind of shows the change in the votes and how the initial poll, how people voted in the initial poll has changed quite a lot, and this can be seen by the different colours in the graphs. So, for example, a lot of the, quite a few of Green voters decided to vote for the Liberal Democrats after the hustings, and you can see this across a lot of parties, especially for the Yorkshire Party, which didn't have any votes in the first poll.
But you took pity. No, they liked what you said.
So to move on to a more obvious depiction of the change in votes, so the Brexit Party had a 0% change in the votes. The Conservatives had a decrease in 7.25% of the votes. The Green Party, 5.8% increase. The Labour Party, minus 10.4% of the vote. The Liberal Democrats have 1.45%, as do the SDP, of an increase in vote. And quite astoundingly, the highest increase in vote is the Yorkshire Party at 11.59%. I think what also is really interesting is the fact that after the Hustings, people that wanted to vote for different parties that weren't represented here tonight have actually decided in the poll to vote for parties that have spoken tonight. And then just to quickly show you the graphs for York Central and York Outer, as you can see from the initial polls, the voters have changed, and a lot of people that voted for one party have actually changed their ideas. So in first place is the Liberal Democrats with 18.8% of the vote for York Central.
First place now.
Oh, sorry, second, sorry. Then, first is Rachel Maskell with 45.8% of the vote, and then it's 18.8% of the vote for the Liberal Democrats, and also the Green Party as well. Sorry about that. And then it's the Yorkshire Party with 8.3, which is neck and neck with the Conservative Party, which is also 8.3%. And then to quickly summarise York Outer, as you can see, Julian Sturdy with the Conservative Party is still ahead with 42.9% of the vote, closely followed by the Liberal Democrats with 35.7% of the vote, and then by Labour with 21% of the vote. And then the changes will be up on the screen for everyone to have a look at. So yeah, that's everything. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Nell. I think it's worth pointing out how difficult it is to stand up in front of an audience and extemporise like that. So, Nell, well done. You did a really good job. Thank you very much. I said at the beginning that we begin and end our Quaker meetings with some silence, and usually with a handshake at the end with people around us, whether we agree with them or not. So let us do that. Let's just bring this to a close by a few seconds of silence, and then we can shake hands, and then we can go and vote on Thursday.